Welcome to the fourth PAMS Salon. Today is the last day of the PAMS, finally. I know you can't feel it through the camera, but here in the studio, I can see everyone sparkling their eyes to go home and watch Netflix. Talking about the distance and access, PAMS was held in digital this year again. Our purpose was to make our global colleagues to be accessible for our market, and yet we're still missing out so many of our colleagues who didn't have the information. Information and access has been a key for the reconnection in times of pandemic, and for the emerging artists who didn't have the information, had a difficulty finding the international community who were around the world. So today, our topic is Sorry. So today our topic is post-pandemic, where in the world should emerging artists go? My name is Suhe. I am an independent producer and a researcher working in Korea. I am also a PAMS connector for dance. In the screen, John Ashford is joining. Can you say hello, John? John is.
I'll say hello. Hello.
Hello. John is joining from London, and he is the artistic director of Airwaves Europe. Adam is joining also from Seoul in her own studio as well. Adam.
Hello.
Adam is a programming and production team leader of Korean National Contemporary Dance Company. Charin is joining from Busan. Say hello.
Hello, everyone.
He is a choreographer and the artistic director of the Melancholy Dance Company. His company's work will be streamed after our session, so please stay tuned. Lastly, Anna Letunik is joining from Zagreb, Croatia.
Hello, everybody.
She is an independent curator, producer, and a researcher working across the Europe. In today's session, I will ask some questions to each panels, and one by one, and then we will have a collective discussion and Q&A, so please leave your question in the chat box. First of all, Charin, thank you very much for joining in this busy time. I know you're busy preparing for the performance. But I'm aware that this is your first time joining the PAMS, and your company has been actually appearing a lot in the local scene. So you have been working actively in the international market as well. I want to start with a very simple question. Without really concerning your age, would you define yourself as an emerging artist?
Well, still in the international market, I believe myself as the emerging artist. Because before the COVID-19 pandemic, I've been doing the international touring for like 3 years, but it was with my 20 minutes duet work, only that. And our company itself didn't have much network, so still, I think I'm an emerging artist in the international market. And in the future, I hope that there will be good opportunities for international exchange and overseas distribution and circulation by making good repertoire performances that our company focuses on and completing my new works in the process of production.
Thank you. I asked this question because it is sometimes very difficult to define what emerging and young artist is. For example, I've seen 10 years old piece being presented as an emerging artist piece. For this, John might have a good answer. But before we hear from John, I want to show you the short clip of the Airwaves Europe. Airwaves Europe is a European contemporary dance platform for emerging artists. So let's first watch the clip. That was exciting. I remember 2018 being there, and it was very, very exciting. John, Aerowaves is celebrating 25th anniversary this year. Congratulations. You have been providing platforms for young and emerging artists for a long time, not only at the Airwaves, but from your former jobs as well. First, can you tell us about that experience a little bit? And secondly, I think the standard definition for young and emerging can be a bit vague in the global context. So, how would you define emerging artists? You can mute yourself first.
Okay. Well, I should just explain that I chose that clip from 2018 because you may have noticed some artists from South Korea in it. Uh, Nevertheless, what Aerowaves does is about Europe, and it encompasses that area which goes from the Arctic right through the Ural Mountains down to Portugal. And within this region, there are, of course, very many countries, most of which are in the European Union, and so it's easy to cross borders. But crossing borders, therefore, is really quite different when you talk about the international context, because it depends what you mean by international. It's a very different thing to bring an artist, say, from Papua New Guinea to Toronto, than to provide a performance for a Belgian artist in Rotterdam who might not even notice crossing the border between Belgium and the Netherlands. So within this area, I would expect an emerging artist to have presented 2 or 3 works locally and probably be within about 5 years of leaving education. Of course, there can be no hard and fast rules. A dancer of 15 years international experience might make their first promising work and thus be seen as an emerging choreographer. Or a really young artist might get international attention for an eye-catching piece that was conceived while still a student. And of course, it depends on which European country you are based. The infrastructure for dance in France is so developed that you can pursue an entire career without ever leaving the country. Whereas in Slovenia, you can't really be a professional artist unless you perform abroad. So we have to be quite flexible in the way in which we define emerging artists in terms of the international context.
Thanks, John. We will continue with the talk later at the discussion, and let's talk about Korea. As far as I know, emerging artists in Korea have a clear path to start their international careers, such as performing at the international festival or platforms, mainly in Seoul. I consider that Adam also provided this experience a lot with more than 10 years of experience at the Seoul International Dance Festival before joining the Korean National Contemporary Dance Company. Regardless of the pandemic, how has the emerging artist incubation been achieved in Korea, and what possibilities do you think there are in the future?
I think in Korean dancing, the international festival. Yeah. In Korean dancing, I think the international dance festival have taken an important role for helping advance for emerging artists. I mean, for example, Seoul International Choreography Festival and Competition, we call it SCCF, and they have supported their winner to be selected by their international partners festival and partner theater, and also the Seoul International Dance Festival C-Dance has been working on hard on international expansion of emerging artists, emerging choreographer through various channels like through their specific program like Who's Next. And additionally, Seoul International Improvisation Dance Festival. And also there is Modafe and also SPAF. and NDA Asia Contemporary Dance Festival. And all of these festivals have their own different and specific network, and their international relations are always busy and never stops, I think. And I think there are several advantages for emerging artists when they work with a festival, because each festival has their own artistic direction and also have their international partners, and they find something interesting person or interesting piece to satisfy their artistic demand, and this can be relatively easily connected to the exchange. So yes, I think through the festival, it is more easier to promote one-off exchange to get opportunity through work. So most of emerging artists, they are less stable, and they has a lack of experience and understanding of international market and environment. So I think to work with the festival, who has a strong and enough partnership with the international partner, is more effective to start. So yes, but of course, as we can continue to talk later, but the most important thing is that to start and get into the international market is quite different to keep the continuity. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. We will also continue with your talk later. Anna, you are also a researcher of a cultural policy and curation, and you are also a jury member of the Perform Europe lately. But our audience might not know what Perform Europe is, so first, can you tell us what Perform Europe is? Secondly, have you observed any policy action for emerging artists lately?
Thank you for your questions. So yes, I can introduce the Perform Europe project that I'm currently collaborating with. It's an EU-funded project which aims to rethink cross-border performing arts presentation in a more inclusive, sustainable, and balanced way. In the 40 countries of Creative Europe and the UK. And it includes research, developing a digital platform, and piloting a support scheme for experimental practices to test the new ways of touring and digital distribution of the performing arts. What's also really relevant to mention is that it's given a mandate to develop a policy recommendations on how a new support scheme for sustainable and inclusive distribution of the performing arts can be integrated into Creative Europe program 2021 to 27. As you know, Creative Europe program is a program by the EU for culture and including the performing arts. The main values of the Perform Europe are sustainability, inclusivity, and balance. But sustainability understood as a system of interconnected dimensions like artistic, social, economic, human, and environmental, of course. Maybe to give a better overview of the program, I would like to ask the host to show a short clip on the Perform Europe project, if possible.
Welcome to Perform Europe. Perform Europe is a Creative Europe project. It is for performing arts professionals, producers of work and presenters of work alike in all the Creative Europe countries. Perform Europe is a project that will give us, the performing arts sector, an opportunity to reimagine and eventually change the way we do international touring. The way we show work, the way we travel, the way we exchange, the way we reach audiences. Through Perform Europe, we will hit the road and on an 18-month journey, test new touring and digital distribution models, and propose a new European support scheme for the performing arts. We, the Perform Europe partners, IATM, IFA, ETN, Circus Strata and ITI Consult, are thrilled to take this journey together with you. We thank the European Commission and the Creative Europe programme for the mandate to lead Perform Europe.
Thank you. Also, coming back to the second part of your questions on the support for emerging artists, in Perform Europe as well, there is a focus on making the balance between emerging artists and established artists more clear. And in general, in European cultural policy, there are quite a few opportunities for emerging artists, like European platforms for the promotion of emerging artists. It's a call within the Creative Europe, a call that supports projects that aim at increasing the visibility and circulation of European emerging artists and works outside their own borders in Europe and beyond. And also on the level on national cultural policies, there are always quite a few calls aimed particularly at emerging artists. So I feel there are quite a few opportunities. Also, when we are speaking about the global context, there are many resources on cultural mobility, also with a focus on emerging artists, such as the resource of On the Move network, for example, network for cultural mobility. So, yes.
Thanks, Anna. You can find out more about the Perform Europe at performeurope.eu. While we wait for floor questions, I actually want to ask back to Charin. I think the sustainability issue that previously mentioned is pretty important. I think that's what we should continue to talk on. As an artist point of view, how do you think that we can make sustainable art ecosystem to include emerging artists?
So we are in the COVID-19 situation. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, so actually we are still trying to adapt to the creators, producers, and everyone. So for the future artistic activities, we actually have some opportunities to try out some projects, and there were some active online projects and the support project for online production. So that's how we could continue on the creative works. So for right now, it's quite difficult to do some international exchange and international touring, but I think we can use this time to make better creative works. So if the situation gets better in the future for the international exchange, I think it can be an opportunity to present the better developed international and creative works.
Actually, at the PAMS, what we usually do is to trade works or to discuss about the future opportunities. But this year, I found out that the opportunities are aiming for the further future than we expected. But still, this kind of discussion is very important for the field workers as well. For the sustainability of the international market, does any four of you have anything to add? Maybe John, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I do. I talked about airways in Europe, and I showed a clip which included a work from South Korea. And we do have arrangements with producers in South Korea, in Japan, and Taiwan over the next 3 years, whereby we will exchange artists. And it's very important for me that the basis of that exchange is not just to show a work, but also engage in a residency. And so it will be the case that in our Spring Forward event in April next year in Greece, there will be an artist who will come from the Yokohama dance collection from a couple of years ago and perform the work following a 2-week residency in Athens. And it is also the case that an artist from Europe, Jenna Jalonen, will go to Japan and perform in the Yokohama dance collection, but also have a 2-week residency in Kayak, the Kinosaki Art Center on the west coast of Japan. And I think it's very important when we're considering international travel that we shouldn't simply ask artists to fly in for a couple of performances and fly out again. There has to be at least a couple of weeks basis for some real cultural exchange in order to justify that aviation.
Thanks, John. Actually, last year at the PAMS Salon, Marie from On the Move shared about the concept of deep mobility. And I think that's something that artists are also looking for. However, our funding or policy system doesn't really support that as well because it takes a lot of budget and money. But we can also talk about what next once the artist go on for the platforms and be introduced to the international market. What next? Maybe Aram, do you want to add something?
I mean, the and next, that issue is not easy for everyone. I think that, as I mentioned briefly before, and starting the international career is not difficult for emerging artists, but to make a sustainable and to keep continuity is quite different, and because it is quite depending on the artistic first of all, that is depending on the artistic capacity and also the tactical management, and also the most crucial thing is that they obtain the sincere partnership and trust between people and partners, I think. That is not easy, and that is not everyone can do it. So when it comes to selecting partner, I think the emerging artists also should consider to whom they work and to where their partner is heading to, I think. And recently there are many independent producer and various agency who has a professional background, and besides festival, I think to work with them is also a good way, and they are relatively young and more flexible to understand the artist, and also they suggest the practical guideline for emerging artists. So I think the get a chance is the one and off. It's not. I think that. Sorry. I mean, the sustainability is quite is linked to their trust. So I hope that emerging artists should looking for their partner by themselves. So I think that is the basic step to start their international career, I think.
Thank you, Aram. Anna, maybe at the policy-wise at the Perform Europe, you mentioned that there is a tendency to support emerging artists, but at the same time, is there a policy for the sustainability?
Yes, I mean, I feel in general the COVID-19 reality created this space for a deeper reflection on how do we want to rethink sustainability and how to adopt greener practices and reinvent mobility and adopt digital solutions and so on. So on the level of Perform Europe, there has been a lot of rethinking and brainstorming of what sustainability should be in the future. So it is not only about growth in quantitative terms, of course, but about creating conditions which allow for a long-term perspective and allow the sector and the society to grow in a social sense. So sustainability understood in a social way, meaning more meaningful exchanges with audiences, for example. A human sense, meaning respecting the well-being for artists and art workers. We know that art workers are working in especially increasingly precarious conditions. Also, sustainability in the artistic sense, creating the right conditions for artistic development, of course, with a focus on emerging artists. Also, sustainability in an economic sense, meaning sustainable business models, fair remuneration, because we also know many art workers are doing a lot of work that is underpaid or unpaid work. And of course, sustainability in the environmental sense, meaning respecting the ecological boundaries that are increasing. So you already mentioned this concept of deep mobility, and we in Perform Europe discussed slow mobility, which is actually very similar, which can mean, as John also was mentioning, fewer trips, fewer presentation and meetings, but with a greater focus on local connections, on artists' well-being, on the inclusion of the social groups with different backgrounds, and so on and so on. So sustainability, I feel sustainability is currently being rethought in a much broader sense than before the COVID pandemic.
Thank you. We can also talk about the archive of the emerging artist work. John, I know that one of your most favorite project is the Springback magazine. And this has been also a digital platform for this artists who are appearing at the Airwaves Europe Spring Forward Festival. And for the COVID-19 platforms, digital platforms like PAMS Salon or Springback Magazine has been a very key to connect these artists. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
About Springback magazine, well, that's something we started about 3 years ago, having previously begun an academy for emerging dance writers. We found 10 writers a year from around Europe who wanted to increase their confidence in writing about dance in English. And we noticed that the old analog publications of newspapers were no longer really carrying dance reviews, and that if there was dance writing, it was either very academic or it was a blog. And in both cases, neither were edited in the way in which traditional reviews were edited. So we brought together a group of very distinguished dance critics to mentor a young generation and established Springback magazine as a way of publishing their works. So all of the writers in Springback magazine who are drawn from around Europe come from those 10 a year who have been through the Springback Academy, which accompanies our Spring Forward Festival. So that's the magazine itself. And within it, we now have something called a members area, where you pay a small sum to have access to all of the videos which have been selected by Airwaves over the last few years. So there are about 60 there at the moment of the works which our partners have selected from the submissions of emerging artists from around Europe. Usually we get about 600 videos a year, and we reduce this by a magical process to those 20 who we feel are most promising for presentation in our local circumstances. So they're all available there on the website, together with clips from a whole lot more. So I think this is a really valuable programming resource as a research area for people who don't know so much about dance in Europe, but also for those who are experts but want a single place to go to remind themselves of work which they may be considering programming, rather than going to 20 different websites. That's what we're doing in that digital arena. And we're also beginning to archive dance, since that was your question, in virtual reality, using a stereoscopic 180-degree camera. And we've made 12 recordings so far of those works which are selected by Aerowaves. And these recordings will be shown only in the context of our audience. So it's very important that we take our 25 VR headsets around and present those archive recordings as live an experience as possible.
Thank you. Digital platforms has been a very important matter for the in midst of the pandemic. Charin, you participated the PAMS On for the first time, and PAMS On is also a digital platform. Have you explored it, and have you found out anything about it? Any good and bads?
It's quite a sudden question to me. So I'm actually one of the younger generation, but about the internet online, I'm not that good at it. So I actually ask my team members that I'm working with. So actually, I'm not that good with this internet and online things. So I get a lot of help from my teammates, my colleagues. So more than I have expected, the PAMS choice, I could see that there are quite a lot of activation with this PAMS choice and PAMS online. And I could see that they have worked really hard to enable people to interact with each other, even in this COVID-19 situation. So I just wonder how we can promote this so that more people can participate and join and be with us in this discussion.
Right. We need a strategic management for running the platform, and we also need all of our participants to promote about this platform as well. We have a floor question from Q. Regarding to reason and relationship between emerging artists and international connection, for Anna, is there any research data about what emerging artists demand international connections? So, for example, reason, financial reasons, since the domestic market is small or not enough, artistic research, and so on. Would you be able to answer?
Of course, there is research. I'm not sure if it's focused particularly on emerging artists, but there is quite a few research on the benefits of international mobility for the performing artists. And of course, one of the reasons is also economic. So let's say that quite a few performing arts scenes in the world couldn't exist without international mobility in the financial sense, because there is often not enough support on a national level for the independent performing arts scene. So the economic reason is one of the drivers. But what I would say the biggest driver is of course artistic development and a better connection with the audiences. So for emerging artists, I would say the main motivator is of course the artistic development and networking, of course, and then also the economic drivers, which would then make emerging artists more sustainable. So I would say that international touring is one of the is crucial for sustainability of many artists.
Thank you. In the chat, Kat Jones is joining, and she says performance archives is such a great hook for keeping membership engaged, and for maintaining international connections and opportunities for Australia artists is a big issue because they are thinking about here and a number of cross-cultural virtual residencies are emerging. Feedback is that the relationships being established in the pre-visit cultural knowledge is being built is something that they want to keep doing as part of in-person residencies in the future. Maybe John, do you want to comment on this?
Well, I think I may represent some colleagues in being absolutely bored with talking to people through flat screens. I'm very happy to be here now, and I'm happy you can see my head. But actually, I communicate with my whole body. And dance is about the whole body, and it's about people in a room breathing the same air. Now, I know that this is not easy during times of COVID. So we have to look forward to those times when it will be possible again, I think, to re-emphasize that the live arts are of a quality which cannot possibly be mediated either by the flat screen or by virtual reality. So for the moment, we're doing our best. But I don't think that there is any substitute for the kinesthetic presence and response that happens between a dancer and an audience in a space made for the purpose. That's usually a theatre, and it's that actual bodily response in the audience to the real figure in front of them, which animates my interest in this art form. While I'm talking, could I just say something in response to Anna? Because I think that it's not just the will of the artist to travel that animates the international field. Of course, it helps their development, but presenters must be persuaded that there is a good reason to go the extra mile to include that work in the program or festival. What is unique, or at least individual about it? How does it speak of cultural difference? What new experience will bring to their audiences that is not already met by local artists? Although international touring will undoubtedly enhance the reputation of an artist and likely bring better resources as a result, it should not be seen as a single criteria of success. Speaking in a local accent that your neighbours will understand is of equal value.
Thank you, John. Talking about the diverse audience, when an emerging artist appear in the scene, perhaps a younger generation of the audience may join the performance. If there is an older generation in the stage, perhaps there is also an older generation who's interested in seeing that as well. Charin, this is not prepared question, but I've seen you performing at the Metaverse lately. And I know that it was organized by your producer, Minyoung Kim, and you've met so many of the new and virtual audiences. How was that experience been?
Well, so it was like playing a game, so it was quite fun and exciting. So even without meeting them in person, we could introduce our artwork. And although I was not that interested at first, but it was really amazing that I could share the details with other people. And I could see that there could be different types of ways that we meet together. So it was quite amazing, and there was something that there could be improved further. Personally, in my opinion, I really want the normal times back. Even when I was doing this, I really want the past times come back, the situation to get better. But on the other hand, our artwork on the metaverse and offline work, I think we can do this together if the situation gets better. And I think that would be more interesting, and we can try more new things if that becomes possible in the future.
Thank you. We don't have a lot of questions on the chat at the moment, but I want to continue the conversation with perhaps with Aram. Talking about the online spaces, Korean National Contemporary Dance Company has also started a dance film platform. This is not just aimed for emerging artists, but you've been matching people to create work and introduce this kind of work. Can you introduce about that a little bit?
There are several dance film production in KNCD.
Can you wait a second, please?
But it was because of the pandemic, and it has been started since last year. Of course, the filming production and filming is also quite different way of different creative way for dance maker and dance choreographer. But and last year we started the filming production because we couldn't do the performance on stage, but instead, the kind of just the filming the performance itself is not effective for audience. Also, then the choreographer. So instead, we decide to show the quite different artistic result through the filming language. So I think as a result, we are still proceeding. We're still processing to make a good quality, but we are not satisfied with the artistic result yet. But I think we can see the possibility to make another different level of the dance and dance creation. But it is also it can expanding through the dance filming production, we can expand the audience market. So many people, the viewer through the YouTube or the live streaming, the dance filming can explore the new market of the audience, and then we hope that we can bring them into the real audience in the theater. So we're still going on, but there is not optional thing for there is not replacement of the stage performance. It's just another type and another level of creation, I think. Yes.
Yes, I agree. It is never becoming the alternative for the stage performance. I mentioned about the metaverse or the dance screen, dance on screen, because these days audience are becoming their own curators, and through the screen and through the digital space, audience are curating their own pieces. They're finding their own pieces, and I think this kind of a development is important as well. John, about the curation on the emerging artists, our Q wanted to know about the curation of the emerging artists. How do you select them, especially before the pandemic and after the pandemic? Have you heard anything from your members, the difference about it?
Well, we are in touch through the flat screen, but we have our meeting in about 2 weeks' time for the first time face-to-face in Austria. And there will be about 40 of our members assembling there. And this will be the first time that they have been able to meet for a couple of years because of the COVID pandemic. So I'm not very up to date with them because at the moment, what they are doing is the research amongst those 600 videos and deciding which they themselves will bring as priorities to that meeting. I think that probably the meeting will run just as much as it usually does, that we will try and be as fair and inclusive as possible. I know that what we're doing this year is looking at works which have been made this and last year. So it was important not to accept applications that were from pre-COVID times, because we wanted to compare works from those artists who have struggled in these difficult conditions to make work with other artists who have been working in the same conditions. Because we didn't think it was fair, really, to look at somebody who had made work from 3 years ago under very different conditions alongside somebody who perhaps could only make a solo for reasons of COVID. So that's one condition which will be different. And the other is that previously we have been insistent that works must have had public performances, usually on stages. Whereas now we've loosened those restrictions and we're looking at many videos which have been made in studios with an audience perhaps of a dozen people sitting along the wall of the studio, because it simply isn't possible to present a work in a theatre with an audience as it was before COVID for some people in some countries. So these are differences. And I'm looking at those videos now alongside everyone else. And I can see that works are more deeply considered, perhaps, than they were before. Perhaps they are more finished because the cycle of necessary and constant production has been interrupted by COVID. It is often the case that independent artists can exist only by virtue of a grant to make a new production. So every year, or even more frequently, they are obliged to make new works in order to live. So sometimes these works are not very well finished, they're not very deeply thought, and they're rushing on to the next one. I think that what we will see this year is works which were benefited from a gestation period of perhaps 9 months when people have not been able to perform. And this will certainly be to the benefit of both the choreographers and their works and the audiences when they finally get to see them, because they will be from emerging choreographers, but more detailed, more mature, and more secure in their presentation.
Thank you. We have only 10 minutes. I just want to go around and just ask this last question. This is very simple but urgent question, I think. Do you think that emerging artists can be hopeful about working internationally after all this pandemic and difficulties? Can we go round from Charin, Anna, Aram, and John?
So this question, I think I answered this question before. So about the sustainability of the artworks and about whether the emerging artists can be hopeful about working internationally, I will just give one answer to this. And I think, of course, they can have such hope. So it's true that it will take some time until the offline exchange become active, but we have some teleconferencing and metaverse, and we have new ways of mobility, and we can continue to present our creative works and introduce our works. So like John said, in better situation later, we will be able to present better and more profound and deep artworks. And what I want people outside this art sector is that the young artists and the emerging artists, I hope they should be provided with some opportunity to experiment and fail, not only in terms of competition but in other formats too. So of course there might be some differences in terms of the level and skills of the people who have the experience and no experience, but we should be able to discover the potential of these emerging artists.
Thank you, Charin. And Anna?
Yes, I also agree that that the situation is hopeful because we are already practicing some different solutions and different formats, and we have been traveling without traveling, which is an interesting approach to being together. What's also interesting is this. How can I say that in a way accessibility has increased because we have more or less the same possibility to connect if we have access to internet. Of course, many audiences and artists as well don't have access to internet. So that is also something that we need to keep in mind, that the digital divide is becoming more present. But the travel privilege is not that relevant anymore, and the visa, as well as the visa obstacle. So I feel that the field is restructuring, but that the pandemic also it just hit a pause button, and it made us rethink on how do we want to proceed in the future, also in relation to the hyperproduction and hypermobility that was happening before the pandemic. So yes, I agree that the situation is hopeful for the emerging artists, but that we need to approach it, let's say, carefully, and not to go back to the old patterns that were sometimes, let's say, counterproductive. But with the deep reflection and also in solidarity with the ones that do not have the same privileges, like the gap between the emerging and the established artists, that there is some hope for the performing arts landscape to restructure itself.
Thank you. And Adam?
I think before pandemic, the structure of the international relations, international touring for emerging artists between Europe and Korea is quite different, I think, because to go to abroad, we should cross the sea. It takes cost a lot, and it takes time and money. I mean, it's not as small. So the economical beneficial is not big for emerging artists. Of course, not only emerging artists, but also the established or many other Korean choreographer as well. So of course, the pandemic makes time, and it takes more time than before pandemic, but it costs more time and the money to be able to go abroad, and the procedure is quite complicated. But as the other people already said, I mean, that yes, the situation will become more hopeful and will be better. But I think especially emerging artists should more careful when they select the touring, international touring, and make they achieve the international career, because practically it takes more time and money, and they should, I don't know, they should know that besides the economical profit, what kind of things can, and what do you want, what do you get when you give up the profit, and depending on what you want to achieve, I mean, the direction of the international career for emerging artists should be changed. So the future is hopeful, but it's not easier, I think.
Thank you, Adam. And lastly, John.
Okay, well, I think the future is also hopeful, but it will be different because everything that we do has to take into account the climate emergency. And so every time we book a flight, whether it's an emerging artist or a major company, we have to justify why that flight is necessary. And we're trying to establish some new models in airwaves. And I'll just very quickly give an example for what we'll be doing next year. There is a Spanish artist who has made a work to the Bolero Extended, a Ravel, with 6 dancers from Madrid and 6 dancers from Barcelona. So 12 dancers on stage, a lot to travel. He'll be coming to Greece, to Elefsina, for our festival, with 6 of those dancers, 3 from Barcelona and 3 from Madrid. And he'll spend 10 days to 2 weeks remaking that work with 6 Greek dancers. And this new work, remade with the mixture of the Greek dancers and the Spanish dancers, will be the one which is presented in our festival. It probably won't be presented again because we would hope that this production would go on and only 6 rather than 12 dancers would travel to other countries and make new productions of this work. So that's one way of limiting the amount of travel, and it's also a way of engaging more thoroughly with the local community, because when you engage local dancers, you also engage a local audience. And so I offer this as just one example of actually many we're trying, where we limit aviation, we limit travel, we try and make coherent tours, which are in a chain rather than flying constantly from one country to another, to insist on travel by electric vehicle or by train, wherever it's possible, even if it's more expensive, and so on. So this, I think, is the landscape in which we will emerge when COVID dies down and we reconsider how to present opportunities for emerging artists.
Thank you, John. It's almost our time for the next schedule. I hope that what we've discussed aren't just a small talk, but rather a constructive conversation for the future opportunities. For the next schedule, there is PAM's Choice for Dance coming up, so please stay tuned. This session can be viewed again at the swap card after the PAM's event is finished. Also, you can still messages to each other and say hello even after the event is finished. Thank you very much for attending to the PAMS Salon. Thank you, John, Anna, for joining early in the morning. Adam, Charin, thank you very much. We will try to see you next year, hopefully in person. Thank you.